Should I be tripping alone or should I trip with friends? How are they different and which one is better? Before you get sucked out of this video by the YouTube algorithm, I gotta make sure you understand that you should never ever trip with people who you're not close to. If you're gonna trip with someone, it should be a friend who you trust and feel comfortable with. Tripping with strangers can be really awkward and unpleasant for a lot of people. At higher doses, I personally wouldn't trip with someone I didn't trust with my life. That is essentially what's on the line when you're approaching ego death, so make sure you're with good people. Now, the way psychedelics work is super interesting. It can feel like you're being taken out of this reality, and typically the less distractions you have, the deeper into ego death you're gonna go. This is why a trip in silent darkness will usually be so much more intense than a trip where you're walking through a forest. Having friends with you will pretty much consistently ground you into this reality, whereas tripping alone can really get you lost inside your mind. You don't constantly have someone else pulling you out of the psychedelic realm so that you can talk about how mushrooms came from space or something. It's also worth mentioning that ideally they're gonna trip with you. Tripping with sober people is really strange, and the wavelengths you're on are just too different. I wouldn't recommend it unless you just have a sober trip sitter or something. Tripping with other people is almost always a huge bonding experience, like traveling the universe together, and it can be a pretty intimate thing. I've had a lot of experiences where I've looked at a friend when tripping and saw myself in them. I've had trips where I forgot which one of my friends I was, and it's not uncommon to feel like you've merged together and become one. Sometimes you can literally read people's minds and they can read yours. Don't worry, they probably won't find your search history, but it might make some people feel really vulnerable, like their soul is exposed. Tripping with friends also comes with some other risks. If someone starts having a challenging experience for whatever reason, the whole vibe might change for everyone, and if you're too vulnerable to deflect those vibes and create your own, you might get pulled into that trip. Another thing I've noticed is this sense of responsibility for your friend's well-being. In a lot of my group trips, I felt more anxiety on the behalf of others than myself. You also have to be careful as to how you communicate things because people might misinterpret you. This is why I personally prefer tripping alone a lot more. I don't have to worry about hurting or dealing with anyone else. The benefit to being with friends is that if things do go south, it's often a lot easier to pull yourself back up, especially if your mates are emanating good vibes. To me, one of the biggest cons to tripping with others is that I just won't go as deep. It's like spending your trip constantly looking around and never stopping to close your eyes and let yourself go. Even when I do take a few minutes to meditate, the knowledge that I'm with people still seems to hold me back. In terms of personal growth, tripping alone also tends to give me more value than tripping with people many times over. My thoughts are more introspective and focused on my life, my mistakes, my future, or the nature of the universe. I can actively write down insights, I can draw, I can meditate, and have full control. It's not really clouded as much by the presence of others and the desire to keep playing the role of Daniel. I can surrender my ego far beyond where I would let myself than if I had the responsibility of being in a social setting. I also really enjoy having total control over the music or lack thereof and pretty much everything else in my setting. Sometimes I feel like just lying down in silent darkness. Other times I want to dance like no one's watching. I mean, you could call it dancing, though a cat having a seizure might be a bit more accurate. Now, when it comes to deciding which is better, that's gonna depend on who you are and your intention. I've benefited a lot and had some of my best experiences with both. Each setting can be super valuable, and ultimately it's worth exploring both so that you can get the most perspective and find out what's right for you. What's your favorite way to trip? I read every single comment, so share your stories. I love reading them, and I will see you all next week.